Welcome to the show. Today's guest is a very, very special man. He touched my life, and I know a lot of people's lives. Over the 30 plus years he was a teacher at Manzano High School. The man I'm talking about happens to be the formidable, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. O. Better known as David Ostrovitz. It was wonderful to get to sit down and talk. This podcast kind of navigates his life and how he ended up in New Mexico, as well as all of his years of teaching and some of the crazy ups and downs. We got into some pretty neat stories about what it was like being a teacher to so many kids and so many generations and having had an impact on so many people. I know a lot of people are going to be excited to know that Mr. O put out a CD of his own since he's retired. So at the end of this podcast, we do play one of the tracks of his choosings from that album. I'll certainly insert links so that you can follow some way of getting in touch with him and getting that CD, or just shooting him an email and checking up on him, seeing how he's doing. I thank you for listening to the podcast. Just want to encourage you to subscribe, to like, to tell a friend. We appreciate all of your feedback, and I definitely know you're going to enjoy this podcast. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. O. Mr. O, thank you so much for being on the podcast, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure, Claudio, as always. And especially since you bought me lunch, which is, we'll do podcasts for food.
Hey, that sounds great, man. That sounds great. You can't be telling that, though, because everyone's now going to be like, hey, bro, I did your podcast, but you didn't buy me lunch.
Right.
I'm going to be like, oh, well, Mr. O holds a special place in my heart, and I needed to pick up his tab, You also came and supported the show, which honored you as well in many ways, as well as Mr. Anthony, the show that me and Jono did. And so I was like, I not only wanted to hang with you and see you and take you out for lunch, but also this opportunity to do podcasting and to get lunch was an opportunity to pay you back for coming and supporting us and always supporting us, because you always do, man. So
that was such an amazing concert and very emotional. Because... it sort of was almost like the passing of the torch, The young guns come in but pay tribute to their mentor. And, awesome. It was really a wonderful concert. I think everybody in the audience just felt just very, kind of emotional and just,
absolutely. There was a warm feeling in the air that night of love and of tribute.
There definitely was. Yeah.
Awesome memories, especially because, it was like me and John were talking about all these stories and stuff like that. And I know you must have been sitting in the audience with the biggest grin, because it was like we were talking about all these interactions we were having and stuff. And it was amidst the classes of yours that we were taking, and in the hallways of your classrooms and the experience of your program, which has done so much for so many people in the city, man. I was telling you at lunch that I can't tell you how many times over the years, as I've had a Manzano guitar, just a Manzano shirt on, and someone will talk about, not even knowing that I'm in the guitar program, just bring up your name, I'm checking out back in the day whenever Redbox was not around and Blockbuster was still around. I remember going and checking out movies and having checking out a guitar, so I think it was like Crossroads or something like that.
Right.
Or, and they were like, and I had the Manzano shirt on, and they said, oh man, I studied with Mr. O back in the day. It's like,
yeah. Back in the day, right? Going way back.
How long was it that you initially came to? Well, let's start before Manzano. When did you first come to Albuquerque? When was your first come to Albuquerque?
Well, after I graduated from college.
You came to UNM for college, right? Or where'd you go?
Yeah, well, I had gone to college at University of Michigan for my bachelor's degree.
Right.
And then at the end of my college years, I got married, and my wife and I decided that we wanted to try somewhere else beside Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Detroit. My dad was a tool and die maker. He worked in the auto industry.
Wow.
So that was a logical place for him. But, Detroit, sort of a nitty-gritty city.
Yeah.
The weather sucks, it always, it felt like it snowed, like 11 and a half months out of the year. So my wife and I were looking for something new, and we traveled out west and came to Albuquerque. Just felt right. This was 1974.
Wow.
And, sometimes you make these big life decisions just kind of on a feeling. And we just felt like Albuquerque was the right place for us. So that's where we settled.
How cool.
Yeah.
So you came from a big family, you were telling me. Your second child of how many
second
kids?
child out of 7 kids. Yeah.
7
kids. Big family.
Big family in Michigan.
That's why, I don't know if you noticed at lunch, but I always eat as though the invading armies are crossing the Rio Grande. Because when we used to sit down to eat, the person with a slow fork went hungry. So. My wife always gave me a hard time because she grew up, she was almost like an only child because she had one older brother who was quite a bit older than her.
Yeah.
And she said, David, why are you eating so fast? What's going on? She thought something was coming, something wrong was going to go down. Because for her, it was usually just her and her mom and dad.
Right.
And so for me, it was, sitting down with a family of 7,
Wow.
and so you had to eat quick if you wanted to. So yeah, that was sort of the atmosphere I grew up in.
Now, was your father a musician or your mother a musician? Where did music come into the picture for you?
My mother loved music, and after she graduated from high school, she went to live with her aunt, who lived in the Washington Heights section of New York City. Now, I've never been there, but Washington Heights, I don't know if it still is, but it was sort of a hub for musicians and artists and theater people. And so she really loved music, and they used to do what they called hootenannies in that area. And she would go to these, you paid a little bit of money.
Yeah.
It'd be held in somebody's apartment or something. And Pete Seeger would sometimes be there, and Oscar Brand and Josh White Jr., some of these great folk musicians. And she would sometimes buy their albums. So when I was a kid, growing up in Detroit, she used to play a lot of this stuff. And I was, I loved it, and I loved the sound of the banjo. And then she would take me to hear Pete Seeger play.
Wow. Yeah.
He was, in the 1950s, there was the Red Scare and all this stuff, and he was blacklisted from television, most radio. So we used to go down to the Union Halls, downtown Detroit, and I'd hear him play. And he did a children's concert once, and he invited the kids up on stage, and he let me hold his banjo, and it was like,
wow,
that was like the Blues Brothers movie with Jake in the back of the church, the white light, the celestial voices, and once, I just got so interested in it. And then when I got a little bit older, she, got me just an inexpensive banjo that she had found in the paper. And I got the Pete Seeger book, and I started, learning how to play.
How cool is that? Now, and when did the guitar come into the picture after that? I mean, right away, alongside the banjo?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. My grandmother knew that I was interested in guitar, and she used to wait for the bus to come to our house. She lived in Detroit, and I guess there was a pawn shop near the bus station. So she bought me this $5 guitar, and so and so I started learning some basic chords and that sort of thing. But so my mom's the one.
Who got you started?
Who sort of got me? Yeah, who got me started and got me interested in it and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you went to Michigan for what? Did you automatically go for education, or did you go for something else?
No.
What was your undergrad?
I actually have a degree in history.
Wow, you're a history undergrad.
Yeah, I have a history major, and I took quite a few science classes, too.
Why history?
Because I was interested in it. I was always interested in politics, current events, things. And I still am. And, I still read some.
Are you a Howard Zinn guy?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, going into University of Michigan in the late 60s, there was a lot of politics going on. That was when SDS was there, Tom Hayden and all those folks. But I was always interested, and that's another thing I got from my mom too. She was very well read. She liked politics and history, and she was always interested in things. So I ended up with a history degree. Wow. I did take a few music classes. Basic classes where you started understanding the structure and form of music and that sort of thing. But I didn't take, music ed classes or anything like that.
Got you.
And so that's kind of where it was at for me.
So you did, I'm guessing you finished in 4 years like usual people do.
Yeah.
And how'd you meet Rose?
Well, I met Rose
together?
through a mutual friend.
Oh.
And she used to come up to Ann Arbor to visit him. Okay. But she and I sort of hit it off,
Whoa. So she used to come up and visit your friend.
Yeah.
And you kind of stole her away.
Exactly. Yeah, I still think he's somewhat pissed about that. But yeah, that really is what happened.
Wow. Man.
And so we would, she and I would get to talking, and sometimes I'd play music and stuff,
right.
And that sort of thing. And so we ended up, communicating. She went on a field study to study the children's houses in Israel for a couple of years. But then when she came back, again, she came back to see my friend, but I came over, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Oh, hey, Rose.
Yeah, so that's how we met. Yeah, through a mutual friend.
How neat is that? And how soon after you guys started talking did you tie the knot? Because you said you got married before you came to New Mexico.
Yeah, we did. It actually happened pretty quickly. She came back to the States. Okay. I think it was maybe March or April, and we ended up getting married that October. I mean, but see, we had known each other before, and we had this communication. And we started a life together, and we decided we didn't want to start it in Michigan. So,
wow. And so you guys got married that was in the 70s.
Yeah.
Now, what was going to school in Michigan like in the 70s? I mean, were you into did you do any psychedelics in that phase of your life, or not really?
No, not really. Okay. I mean, it was a pretty wild time. The first night I was there for my introductory orientation, there was a rock concert on the Diag, which is the big area in the center of campus, to raise bail money for the people who had been arrested the night before protesting the Vietnam War.
Whoa.
So that, and like I said, Tom Hayden and SDS, that's where all those people were at that time.
Okay.
So it was a real hot spot for that sort of thing. And some things there were certain things that I attended, some things that turned violent that I didn't want to be a part of, Yeah. And I had friends who experimented quite a bit, with different things. Yeah. But I sort of, I really wasn't into that. To me, the thing that people really loved was a $2 bottle of Boone's Farm, or what's the other one? Boone's Farm and Ripple.
Were those types of beers or what?
Wine. It was like a gallon for $2.
What? Oh yeah.
No, that's it wasn't until I was in my late 20s or 30s that I realized that not all wine had a twist-off cap. But Michigan was really sort of the epicenter of a lot of the protests against the Vietnam War.
Interesting.
And I ended up going to the March on Washington in 1969.
Yeah.
And they had active groups in Ann Arbor, promoting travel to that, and also being involved in political activity. So it was really like where things were really happening at that point in time. So that was kind of an education in itself. And I remember talking a little bit about this to one of my students once, who asked me, what things were. But he says to me, and it was sort of like I could hear the harmonica in the background and the crackling of the campfire. He said, "Mr. O, what was it like in 1968? And it was like in the movies where they, I said to him, but the way he said it was like it was ancient history. And so I said, well, we hitched up the wagons and, tied the oxen to the front of the cart and, headed off. But it was just so funny the way he said it, like it was like another
world, right?
Another world, so far back. I said, we had these things called records, that we put on turntables and stuff. So, wow. but it was a really interesting time to be in Ann Arbor during the late 60s because all those things were going on.
So you left Michigan and you came to New Mexico.
Right.
And what was here for you? Did Rose start working? Did you start working right away? What
well, Rose was an early childhood educator, and she started working in a preschool in town, and then I was working part-time and going to school to get my music education degree. And it's sort of the way it sort of happened was Rose started working at a very well-known preschool here in town called Serendipity Day School. It was one of the first schools that took in made arrangements for disabled, preschoolers to attend, as well as, other students. And it's a very well-known preschool. So I started doing some music activities with the kids. I bring in my banjo and guitar. And word got out, and this woman who was the director of the preschool at UNM, and I can't remember the name of it, but she asked me if I would come and do some music with the kids there at the UNM preschool.
Wow.
And she invited, one of the times she invited Dr. John Batchelor, was the head of music ed at UNM. And he said, David, you have a lot of talent doing this, but he said, you have to, go to school and really, learn how to do this and get your credential and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how that started. And he encouraged me. And
so that happened, and then you went to UNM to get the music ed degree?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how I came to his attention, and he encouraged me to enroll in the program. Yeah, he was a wonderful mentor to me. And there were other people, too, who really helped me. Bill Seymour, and then when I actually did my training, Louise Loomis, who is a extremely well-known general music educator for elementary kids. She's the one who sort of took me under her wing and showed me some of the things that I needed to do.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's how it happened.
Was Mr. Clark teaching the choir
department? Yes, he was.
At that point?
Yeah, he was my choral director.
Wow.
Very, very nice guy, too.
Wow.
Did
you grow up with his daughter at all, or was she?
No,
she was after you, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't really know her, and because I already had a degree, I was able to kind of finish in a couple of years, and but I had wonderful people who. That's one of the reasons why I always took mentoring my students so seriously, is because you realize that you've been given the gift of other people mentoring you.
Yes.
And when I was at UNM, like I said, the people that I mentioned, John Batchelor, William Seymour, Louise Loomis, these people, took me under their wing and really made it possible for me to get through school and get my credential, and ended up getting teaching positions.
Wow. So now, music education programs, to my understanding today, are geared towards choral, orchestral, or band.
Yes.
And so, which department did you choose, or which route did you go?
I was a rebel. They didn't know what to do with me.
This guy plays banjo. What is he gonna do?
You know what?
Sing.
One of the old timers there at UNM, who was sort of kind of this curmudgeon is a complimentary word I can give you, but he told me, well, what instruments do you play? And I told him banjo and guitar, and he said, well, maybe one day we'll offer something in banjo and kazoo. it's interesting because they had to sort of work out some curriculum for me.
Wow.
To be able to graduate. But the cool thing about that was people who followed me, like Ben Perea and Eduardo Trujillo, and some of the other folks who ended up doing guitar programs. Some of them did band also. I sort of laid the foundation for that because they had to develop some kind of curriculum to get a student like me through school. Wow. So I feel like, I broke I want to say
right?
glass ceiling, but some kind of ceiling.
Yeah.
And because they had to sort of work things around so that I could graduate because I wasn't your traditional student, right. Band, choral, or orchestra person.
Right.
And I actually ended up having to get my degree through the College of Education as opposed to the College of Fine Arts, which pretty much everybody else did, So yeah, I kind of laid the groundwork for that.
All right. So how was the experience of getting out and then jumping into the workforce? Did you right away get work, or how did?
Yeah. Well, what happened was when I was I graduated. I actually finished my coursework in 1977, even though I didn't end up graduating till 78, and John Batchelor was contacted by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they said that the elementary school music educator at Jemez Pueblo had taken a leave of absence, and they needed somebody to jump in there. Would I do it? So I did that for a while the person was on leave, and then he came back, and then they transferred me to Alameda for a while. And during that time, Dale Kempter at APS, he was the head of music at APS, had me come in and interview for this position at Manzano. And that's an interesting story.
In 1977.
Because my training was in elementary school general music. So Dale Kempter says, well, we have this position at Manzano. It's a full-time guitar thing where you'll have 5 classes of at least 30 kids. And I'm thinking, and I said to him, what the hell am I going to do in a class, with
30 kids,
with 30 high school kids? So he says to me, look, David, he said, we really need somebody to fill this position. We don't want to lose the position. We don't want the position to go away. He says, so I'll make a deal with you. He said, you do it for 1 year. Stick it out for 1 year. He says, and just, throw together whatever you can. Hang in there for 1 year. He said, then the following year, I promise that I will find you an elementary school.
Wow.
So then you know how life is. 34 years later, I'm still at Manzano. But really thinking about it, man. I had taught private lessons, but thinking about running a class of 30 kids.
And 5 of them.
And 5 of them, yeah. It was pretty crazy. But so that's how life.
Wow, man.
He promised me. Yeah,
thrown into the fire. And did you actually end up having 30 kids per class?
Yeah, more actually.
Wow.
Yeah, it was packed, and so it took me a while. It was a long time evolutionary process. Even up until my last years, I was still learning. I was still, trying to understand what I could do to do the best job for the students. When I think back on my first few years, sometimes I feel a little embarrassed because really I was just like being thrown in the deep end of the pool.
You're just trying to figure it out.
And there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't like a band director where there were 25, 30 other band directors that you could go to.
And refer to what was your game plan or your teaching program. Yeah.
So what happened was we formed a little committee. There was a guy, Dan Parker, teaching at Highland High School, and John Truitt, and myself. And I'm trying to think if there was anyone else, but we sort of started meeting regularly to help each other to figure out what it was that we needed to do.
Yeah.
But the good thing is sometimes when I run into students who graduated or were in the program during those early years, they said they enjoyed it and it was good. But of course, when I think back on it now, I really was, scrambling each day to figure out what it was that I needed to do. But somehow I must have done something right because I ended up, the students ended up continuing to sign up for the program.
And so when did kids come into the picture? How soon after Manzano, or was it before Manzano? No, you said 80s.
Yeah.
83 was the first kid.
Yeah, that's right.
So you were teaching
right,
already a couple of years.
Yes, I had been teaching 5 years already.
And did Rose quit her job once she got pregnant, or
well,
she just took an absence?
At first, we tried to work out something, but then we decided that it didn't make sense for her to go and take care of other people's kids while our kids were in daycare. So she took time off, and we had 3 kids fairly close in age, and when they were old enough, they would come to the guitar concerts and all that stuff. They sort of grew up at Manzano with the guitar concerts. I know you remember Vanessa Whitaker. Vanessa was great because when Rose used to bring the 3 girls, sometimes if one of them was getting bored or something, Vanessa would take one out in the lobby or something. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty intense time. But thankfully, I already sort of, after the start of the 5th year, I sort of had my feet on the ground a little bit.
Yeah.
Although I continued, like I said, I feel like I continued to evolve. I continued to refine my skills and knowledge.
Yeah.
And I continued to bring in, as you know, important people to assist in the program.
That was just going to be my next question about when did other people start coming in? Right away?
Right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning.
When I was at UNM getting my degree, one of the people I met was Dan Dowling.
Wow.
And Dan was playing in a rockin' band called Cadillac Bob. Woo. And at first he played saxophone, and then he took over on guitar. But Dan ended up taking a music theory and ear training class with me at UNM, and we were sort of older students a little bit, so we got to know one another, and I also got to know a few other people in the classical guitar department. So, like from the get-go.
So when you started with your position, they told you that you had like a certain stipend to be able to allot to other teachers and stuff like that, or you just kind of worked that into the program and presented it to them? How did that work out?
I did not have any money.
So you just like worked it out.
I just said,
you just needed some help, and you called guys.
I said, Dan, I need help, and whoever else, and Hector Garcia, who was the classical professor, and a couple of the other classical students. I don't know, maybe I took them out to lunch or something. And then, of course, I pulled John Truitt in, to do some of the flamenco stuff.
So John spent some time teaching at Manzano as well. Was he teaching at Academy then? Or
no, he wasn't. He wasn't. He started teach. He had been teaching at the Academy, but then he went to Albuquerque High.
Got you. Okay.
And then he went. Then he was teaching at UNM, and then he went back to the Academy.
Yeah.
But one of the great stories is when I first came to Albuquerque, started taking music ed classes, I needed a recorder, a soprano and alto recorder. So I looked in the Yellow Pages. There was this place, Jim Dell's Music and Furniture Shop in the North Valley. So I called up and talked to the person there, and they said, yeah, they have, he plays recorder, he has a recorder. So I went up to Jim Dell's in the North Valley, go up there, and John Truitt is behind the counter. And, John's a fabulous recorder player. So he and I started talking, and we became good friends, and we've been friends ever since.
That was when you met him.
Yeah, I met him in 1974. And so that was, that was great. So I pulled people in from the get-go. I still have materials. Oh, another person who really helped me was Ambrose Rivera. He had a shop called the Village Guitarist.
Sure,
and,
of course.
Up in the East Mountains. And he brought stuff for me, materials, different scales and exercises.
Yeah.
Dan Dowling gave me some wonderful handouts that involved the blues, and basic blues, and then
So you would take those handouts and give them to your kids for your classes? Or?
Right, exactly.
That's awesome.
And people really pitched in and helped, because I learned from like day one that I had students who really could play well, and I needed help. A couple of my students, in the very first class that I taught, I called up, Bob Brown who still, teaches, was the big time jazz player in town then in the late 70s. His first wife, Grace, was teaching at Manzano. And so I got to know him. And when I met a couple of my students in the beginning class and realized these guys could really play, I called up Bob and I said, help, But I learned from the very beginning that that I was going to need to call on people. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of, too, is that I didn't have that type of ego that says, well,
Right.
Uncle Mike, Michael Anthony told me stories about guys in L.A. who would be terribly hurt if you went and took a lesson from somebody else.
Wow.
But for me, it was just,
it's totally not that. Right.
No, I wanted to help these students, continue to progress. And some of them were, very talented. This one student who came from New York had studied with a serious jazz teacher, and I wasn't going to be able to help him, so I turned him over to Bob Brown. And then there was a young woman I had in my program who's an outstanding classical player, and I put her in touch with Hector Garcia and some of the other people, because the goal wasn't to take care of my fragile ego. The goal was to get help students with the kind of help that they needed. And through the years, when John and you came into the program, immediately I was getting you guys lined up with Michael Anthony.
Yeah, absolutely.
And through the years, I had always done that. I had brought people in.
That's right.
To the class to do workshops. I had Luis Campos do several Saturday workshops on flamenco, did those kind of things. And I'm really proud of that because I understood that the students needed enrichment. They needed to hear from other people. And so I made that a big part of the program from the very beginning. I think Dan Dowling came in the first week I was there. And it was so cool. He gave out this handout called Lucille, and Lucille was Little Richard's theme sort of. That was a song he would come out on stage with.
Okay.
So it's just this basic kind of repeating riff pattern where you change strings. And then he did 3 sets of changes, chord changes.
Yeah.
One was just the very basic 1, 4, 5, 7.
Yeah.
Then the second was with some embellishments, and the third was embellishments, substitutions, all this kind of stuff. So in a way, Dan sort of explained to me about differentiation of instruction, which is when you write arrangements, you try to make sure that you're challenging the people who need to be challenged, but you're not overwhelming the people who are just learning or...
Yes.
So, I had help from the get-go. I'll be the first to admit it.
Of course, man.
Many years I had Greg Daigle coming in and working with me.
I remember Greg Daigle, of course.
And Brian Moore.
Yes, sir.
And Paul Wilson.
Yeah, and Daniel Ward.
And Daniel Ward and all these people because, we have this,
That's right. And not only that, but the effect that then all of the kids get from... getting to study with Daniel Ward, who is a monster flamenco guitar player, but then also jumps on the electric guitar and blow your hair back.
Oh, definitely. And then, this is really crazy.
Yeah.
Much later in the game, I had 2 of my former students, John Maestas and Claudio Perez, come in and work with the students. And that was pretty wild, wasn't it?
Isn't that crazy, man?
But it was great because it also gave them a little taste of what it was to stand up in front of a group of rowdy high school kids.
Man, it was an experience. It's a trip.
And try to get a lesson
Mr. O, I'm going to tell you, I take my head off like every day more and more because I knew from the get-go and from taking lessons early on with Michael that teaching and giving lessons and doing that is just a part of the circle of giving.
Right.
Like you were talking about earlier where you had all of those people that were so instrumental in helping you get to the point that you could be the great educator that you were, that then you put so much emphasis on that so that then you can give it back.
Right.
And that same thing that I learned was like not only amplified but projected out in real life story to me whenever I had the opportunity, honored to come and teach the kids some stuff and think about all these things that you're talking about, as well as like think about how I could write an arrangement that was most like Michael Anthony's, which is probably in my findings the best of the arrangement writings, because he does what you're talking about with Dan Dowling, where he's writing things out in the actual music clef. So if you're advanced enough, then you can go about trying to read and understand everything from that. And then he writes everything out in tab as well as with rhythm.
Right.
So you're not just getting everything in, but you're also, there's the depth of the layers of understanding the information.
Right. And what Michael ended up doing too was he would write out the groups of what he called an ensemble, which was a group solo.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And the group solo, we would aim toward the middle, the middle ground of the people in the class. Not too hard, not too easy, but just something that was good. And then he would write out scales that the solo was based off of. And then those students like you and John and other people who were motivated would go to his studio.
Yes.
And he would work with you on using those scales to develop solos. So the very advanced students who wanted that could have that experience. And then they would play that solo on the concert.
Oof, it was real time.
And so that, again, that was one of those things where I wanted to make sure that I was reaching everyone and challenging the people who needed to be challenged.
You're totally right, man.
And so that was a wonderful thing.
This thing that you're talking about it was such a connection from my middle school, even though there was a disconnect. And it was so funny because I had a show at the Outpost recently, and I'm sorry I didn't invite you in time or even tell you about it. But Michael,
I try not to be insulted.
I'm sorry. Michael came and Bill Brodsky came, and I got a picture between the two of them.
Okay,
and I could like feel the magnetic repel, between them.
Yeah,
I say that with all love, but I mean. There was that disconnect of the teaching philosophies that were so different from Bill Brodsky's coming up to then go into y'all's program, which was so universal and spoke to everybody, not just everybody, but hundreds and over the years, thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of students. And so the experience, though, the reason that I'm bringing all that up was because the experience of soloing and what you're talking about that Michael laid out with that, the group solo stuff was like the ultimate goal of like how you can truly capture a class's attention with teaching everyone a good solo on a song.
Yes, they did.
As well as like offering them the opportunity that if they got it and it was easy enough for them or too easy for them, then they could take that solo, get a lesson, and like work on really soloing and making their own solo on top of it. But I mean, Bill Brodsky offered that opportunity to me in a way that I was getting frustrated in this class, and I would just kind of start talking to the classmates because guitar, just kind of would come easy, and I'd pick up the stuff, and he would call my mom at home and would say, "Okay, Claudio's disrupting the class. Like I understand that he understands the stuff, very quickly and stuff, but like."
That's why you fit in so well, Claudia, because you were a rebel. You were a rebel.
He needs to not disrupt. And my mom was like, "Mijo, you need to go apologize to him." And I was like, "I don't want to." I was upset and I was angry at him. And then I went and apologized and eventually started taking lessons with him. Yeah. And he would teach me these blues things that then eventually, whenever we'd play songs that there would be solos, he'd offer that same opportunity of song and then the solo and then that different level of, you learn a good song and then you have the opportunity to solo.
Right.
But I mean, that jump from middle school to then learning it with Uncle Mike and then just studying with Uncle Mike and then being in jazz band and stuff and then getting to redo it 5 years after or 6 years after, however long it was after I took my freshman year class to get back to teach the experience of it was something else, man.
Yeah.
I take my hat off to you because I remember even when I first started teaching lessons and I was like, Mr. O, can we have lunch, man? I need to ask you a lot of questions about how the hell do you get through to these kids about teaching the guitar, because it is like, it seems easy, but then you're like, like when you start explaining to someone how to play, all of a sudden you have to realize how you learned it because you can't just speak at them with the lingo you already got, it's like you're speaking Japanese to them, man, like translate it,
Well, the thing that I thought about later on was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or so, I really started getting involved with Zen. doing a lot of reading, and doing some practice and that sort of thing. And Uncle Mike gave me I was doing a lot of reading and talking to him about it, and he gave me this book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is this very, very famous book about one of the people who introduced Zen to Western thinkers. And one of the things, and the first statement says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And what I realized was one of the things that helped me teach was that I always had a beginner's mind, was that you have to be able to kind of figure out what's getting through to the students, what is confusing them, how to set things in motion in a step-by-step manner where you don't skip steps so you don't leave people confused or that kind of thing. Yes. So it was, it took a while for me to develop the ability really to tune into the students and what they were doing, and sometimes to change things up. One of the biggest compliments Uncle Mike gave me was, he said, when I watch you teach, he said, I see you improvising all the time because I'm looking around and I'm watching to see what's getting through, what isn't, what the hang up is, how I could break this down, that sort of thing. So that was a skill I developed over the years. But yeah, you have to kind of approach it in a way where you're kind of tuned into, how the students are picking this up and what you can do to help them succeed. Yes. And because nothing is as frustrating for students, especially at the high school level or adults in general, is to feel like they're lost. You feel like, whoa, I kind of got this, and then all of a sudden it just kind of went away from me. Yeah. So I had to be very, I was always looking, always watching to see, when I had jumped too far ahead or done something that I hadn't broken down significantly. So that was a really important thing in my teaching that I developed.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Can I ask you the name of that book again? You said the name of that book was...
It's called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Beautiful, man.
I started doing some breathing and stuff with the students. Yeah. When halfway through the class, I would get them to stand up and we do some motion and some breathing and some things, because adolescents have what in Zen we call monkey mind. They're either agonizing about the past or worrying about the future, and not enough of their attention is on the present. So when you do these kind of breathing exercises and motion, you bring yourself back to where you are. And at first, especially the guys always laughed, they giggled and they thought it was funny. Yeah. But then if I didn't do it, over time when we did it, they would call me on it. They'd say, hey, Mr. O, it's halfway through the period, and we haven't done our breathing and stretching and our focusing. Isn't that cool?
That's amazing.
And they stole 15 of my Zen books because everybody said they wanted to read these things I was talking about. So I brought in a bunch of books. I said, okay, if anybody's interested, I'll lend you a book. I never got any of them back, but I guess maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, those of you who have one of my books back. I wrote my name on the. But that was really a cool thing, so getting them to focus, because if you're playing music, whatever it is that you're doing, if you want to do it well, you have to be present, you have to be focused. You can't be thinking about, something that happened earlier in the day or something that might come up or that kind of thing. Obviously, you can't remove that altogether, but you sort of change the paradigm to where most of your attention is what's happening right in front of you.
Yeah.
So I used to do stuff like that. But it was so funny because if I didn't do that, especially when we went to the block schedule, the students would call me on it.
Wow.
And it was cool because after we did that, we'd sit back down for the second half of the class. It was like they were sort of, in a better place. So that was cool.
Yeah. Was that something you kept throughout your study? I mean, your years of teaching?
Well, maybe the last 10, 12 years. Yeah, I did stuff like that. Cool. And I would talk to the students about it. I'd say, okay, if I saw them wandering off somewhere, I said, what's the deal? I said, somebody's talked stuff about you, yesterday or this morning. and you're worried about who you're going to eat lunch with, or, you know, you have to go to your job and your boss sucks or whatever. I said, you got to put that aside, you know, and they would laugh because a lot of times those were the things they were thinking about instead of what we were doing. So I said, come on, guys, bring it in, bring the focus back in. So I would talk to them about that, about the concept of monkey mind and or sometimes in Zen they call it emotional thought. But I would do that a lot. Wow. You know, I'd say, "Uh-oh, where are you now? Come back." So that was good.
What was of the craziest experiences you had where a kid came in and you had to pull him out, and like he was being a trouble to the class, you know, like disruptive to the class? Do you ever have to deal with that?
Yeah.
Like some instances that stick out?
I have a great story about that. This was maybe the 4th or 5th year that I was teaching, and I had a 6th-hour beginning class, I believe it was, of mostly seniors, and I don't know how that ended up being that way. And they were always, you know, no matter what I said, they would always take it in a sexual way or something like that. Like one time we were doing an ensemble, a 4-part ensemble, and I said, okay, now group 1 play, now group 2 play, now group 3 play, now group 4 play. So one of the guys gets up and said, group 4 play? I knew that's why I signed up for this class. But the great thing was I had a kid in that class who just about, you know, drove me to drinking. I mean, he was just always being disruptive. He was, you know, he came from this very strict family, and he was the rebel. And he was always driving me nuts. But I want to tell you the great part of that story. Okay, so finally, after 5 years, he graduates. He was on the 5-year plan. Finally gets through. I think it's just because the teachers wanted to get rid of him. So anyways, he was a tech guy. He goes to Austin, works in tech, but he really doesn't like it. So this guy tells him about the fact that he could teach English and technology in Japan. Mm-hmm. So he goes to Japan, and he's teaching high school students, okay?
Okay.
Technology and English. So this is like 20 years after he graduates. I'm in my office in the new music building, okay?
Yeah.
I look at the door, and here's this guy that just about, you know, caused me to have my hair fall out or turn white or whatever. And he goes, Mr. O, he said, before you say anything, he said, I just want to say I'm sorry. Because, you see, now he was working with high school kids, and they were, and I guess, you know, even in Japan, you know, a lot of the kids, you know, were just a little bit rowdy, and he said the girls were all, you know, talking about guys and sex and all this stuff that he used to bother me with. So he says, Mr. O, he said, I'm sorry. That's like my favorite story, is that he really, that's the first thing after 20 years. He just wanted me to know that he knew that he was a pain in the ass. And now that he was dealing with kids who were driving him crazy, he realized that he was one of those kids. And so he needed to come back and apologize.
That is so cool.
Yeah. But otherwise, you know, the truth is, and I say this sincerely, is that I would have taken 98% or 99% of my students in as a son or daughter. I mean, you know, you hear such garbage on the news and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, through the years, I just had such wonderful students. Young people are really incredible. They're more open-minded than most people give them credit for. And obviously, I mean, I did it for almost 35 years, so you know that I loved what I was doing. And it was the kids first. It wasn't really, guitar was part of what we were doing, but it was really about the students, and they were awesome. So when people ask me about, you know, well, you know, did you have to deal with this or that? Or after Columbine, people said, well, are you afraid to go in the classroom? And I said, no.
Not at all, right.
I said, not at all, because I'm not looking at what happened in this one thing in the news. I'm looking at my experience through the years.
Right.
And these young people are awesome.
Right.
And like I said, I would have taken 98 or 99% of them home as a son or daughter. They were just wonderful, wonderful young people.
Now, what was the craziest experience of meeting one of your former kids out in the real world?
Oh,
because I know I've met so many. Like I told you earlier,
there have been a lot. I mean, it's really wonderful because sometimes I don't always recognize them.
Yeah,
and
I know
I'm flattered they recognize me.
How could they forget?
Well, one of the things that I was talking to you about is I had gone to Phoenix to visit my daughter and granddaughters, and I was walking through the airport to the baggage claim, and this woman taps me on the shoulder, and she said, "Hey, Mr. O," she said, "do you remember me? You know, my name is Renee, and I was a student of yours." I think she graduated in like 81 or something like that. And I did. I remembered her and her sister.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I think I did was because her mom owned like a bakery. She did catering. And whenever she had extra cookies or something, she'd
bring. Oh, of course.
Yes. No, they were great. They were involved in the guitar programs. I mean, the guitar club that we had and everything. So she said, "Mr. O, do you live in Phoenix?" And I said, "No, I'm here to visit my grandkids." She said, "So am I."
It's like,
so that was like, okay. Yeah, I guess a few years have gone by. Which brings me to the time I brought an actual Led Zeppelin album into the class, you know, the LP of the fourth. We were talking about, they asked me if I liked records versus the CDs, you know, and I said, well, the thing I liked about the records was the artwork. That used to be a big deal, you know. And so I brought in Zeppelin 4 and I opened it up, opened up the album to where that painting of it was actually an ink drawing, I think, of the Hermit, you know, this famous painting that they had put on the cover. And this one girl raises her hand and she says, "I know that album. She says, my grandmother has it." So, you know, I knew it was getting time for me to pack it in, you know. I mean, I had a lot of students whose parents were in my program, but I never had a student whose grandparent was in my program.
Wow.
I left before then. Yeah, so
you did 34 years.
Yeah, at Manzano
High School.
Yeah.
You won a lot of awards for the guitar program you had there, and rightfully so. I mean, you were recognized as one of the most, one of the strongest guitar programs in the Southwest, in the country even. You know? And I was just speaking with somebody the other day about the experience of him going to a high school. I think he went to El Dorado High School, and the experience for him always wanting to have gone to Manzano High School because he liked guitar and always wanted to play guitar and knew about Mr. O. And like I said, man, it's a continuous legacy that I see all the time where people are like, do you know about have you seen Mr. O? How's he doing? You know, or they heard about everything that happened, you know, when your house got broken into and your guitars got stolen and stuff like that, and they ask about that and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing that I was really proud of is when you get into high school, at the high school level, there aren't a lot of doors open for people who really just want to start learning about music.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, you know, they weren't involved with the band or chorus or orchestra, but they wanted to. My door was always open for them. And I had a lot of students who started with my program in their senior year who are still actively playing guitar and really love it. So that was one of the things I was really proud about, was that my door was open
always,
you know, to students at whatever level of high school, whatever they wanted to do. And I knew that at some of the other schools, you know, the kids didn't have that opportunity. When my daughters, two of my daughters went to Sandia, and they came up with this idea to do a fundraiser for the Battle of Bands, but they didn't have a guitar program there. Yeah. So they asked me if I would do it. Do you know how many bands we had? We had 11 bands. There was so much demand, you know, so many of the kids there were playing, but they didn't have an outlet for it.
Yeah. Wow.
So I feel good that, you know, at least I provided that at Manzano. And the other thing I feel proud about is a lot of the assistant principals who were at Manzano and really respected my program. When they got made principals of other high schools or assistant principals, they brought in a guitar program. Like I know for certain, Albuquerque High and Highland and Cibola, Grace Brown,
right?
When she became principal of Cibola, she brought in Bardo Trujillo. And there were several other schools where, people had come from Manzano, and when they got into a position of administration at these other schools, they brought in a guitar teacher.
It's powerful.
So that really made me feel
that
good.
had to have, man. You see your direct impact.
It was cool. That really was cool. I feel like that's part of my legacy there. So
absolutely, yeah. And it continues to be the legacy that bears fruits upon trees that continue to bear other fruits from other trees and birds.
Yeah, it's amazing. With so many of the students in the program, especially people who are really motivated like you and John and other people. I really didn't have to do a whole lot. All I had to do was put you in the room with a guitar and stand back. I always say that with people like, you and John and other people who are motivated, some of my best teaching was going by a practice room, seeing you guys in there and keep on walking. Sometimes teachers always feel like they got to do something, But for me, it was like some of it was just lighting the spark and standing back.
That's right, man.
Just letting people.
I mean, and offering, like you said, that platform, that open door,
right,
and that feeling, because you can open up a lot more in that feeling of comfort and of like being able to lock yourself in the practice room or find someone else that's shredding that you've been waiting to meet and you finally meet, and you go into the practice room and practice jam one time and it's done. It's like you guys have a lifetime sealed relationship,
Exactly. But, so my students, I always said, my students generally learn more from each other than they did from me, and that was great because it was a class where you could get with people.
Yeah.
And sometimes there'd be people that you wouldn't think would want to have anything to do with each other who would sort of meet over the guitar and became good friends.
Wow.
So that was cool.
I love that. I love that. So you finished your time at Manzano and you started playing the banjo a little more.
Yeah, I started going back to doing things that I had done many, many years ago when I was first learning the banjo. Yeah. And I reconnected with my friend Daryl Bryant, who had been in the Air Force for 30 years and came out and got his teaching credential, came by to visit me with his class. And we started, reconnecting. We become, I call him family. We are family.
Yeah.
And Daryl wanted me to come into his church and do some of the spirituals and stuff that I did clawhammer style on the banjo and guitar. And I started getting into that, and he's the one who encouraged me to make that CD.
Wow.
And so I started doing that. And now, I was going into the Manal School when he was there and doing music activities. And then I went to John Baker to do some with his wife who was teaching there. And now this is the second year I'm working with a group of kids at Tomasita Elementary.
How neat is that?
And it was great because we learned some songs last year. We did performances. I brought in recording equipment. We made a CD.
Mr. O, you can't stop.
And it's such a kick. It's such a kick. Of course, the good thing is that after I'm done working with the class, I can leave. I don't have to stay the rest of the day.
Now I have to back up because I know as people who are listening to this podcast, they heard you say CD and they're saying, "What CD?"
Yeah,
tell me about that.
I grew up listening to, I think I told you my mom would go to these hootenannies with Pete Seeger and those folks. Yeah. And I grew up listening to the music of Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Josh White Jr., who did a lot of spirituals. And so that was the stuff I sort of grew up on and the first stuff that I started playing. And when I was doing these little performances at Daryl's church and classrooms and stuff, Daryl encouraged me he said, you ought to record one of these tunes. So we had a recording studio. So I said, I don't know, I'm a teacher. I'm not really a performer, that kind of thing. So we did, the first one, it came out pretty good. And then he said, how about doing a couple more? So, and then, of course, as time went on, we really got it refined. And then he said, let's make a CD of these things. Wow. So it's a CD of stuff that Uncle Mike would say is in the marrow of my bones. This is the stuff I grew up with. Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, spirituals, those kind of things. So that's what my CD was about.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it has you and your granddaughter on the album artwork. Is that right?
Yes, it does. Yeah. My oldest granddaughter, Eden, who is now almost 8, I think she was about 4 when that picture was taken. Wow. But that was another thing that got me back into doing those kinds of songs, was that when I would go visit them, I would bring my banjo and play those tunes for them. Yes. Those kind of tunes. So that kind of got me going.
Wow.
Yeah. So
now I know that, I was asking you this before and stuff. And so I can hope and imagine that in the future, as people listen to this down the road, they're going to say, I want to get that, And so I'm going to, of course, put in the podcast for people to check out where they can get Mr. O's CD by getting in touch with him and getting a copy from him.
Oh, absolutely.
So, And hey, take him out to go get a bite. He likes the Fiesta Burger over the frontier.
That's right.
I'm just saying.
I was telling Claudio, we'll do podcasts for food. Hey, listen, that was an important lesson I learned at Manzano too.
What's that?
When I had stuff that I needed, instruments moved, things done at the concerts, all I had to do was say one of two things. If it was in the evening, pizza. If it was in the morning, donuts. And I could get my students to do that. And I would even have parents, volunteering.
Show up and
they would come up.
There was donuts,
at the end of the concert, they say, Mr. O, if we help bring guitars back, can we get a slice of pizza too? So yes, food is a powerful motivator. Yeah, I learned that early on. Between donuts and pizza, I could get my students to do pretty much anything.
You move mountains.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it, man. So you started, I love that. But what else did you start getting into after you graduated? Once you finished your 34-year tenure, with Manzano. What did you start getting? What other loves did you get into besides the banjo? I know you started taking lessons with Uncle Mike again.
Yeah, and also I took a blues class from Dan Dowling.
Nice, man.
That's, awesome. It was funny because there were some people in the class who were struggling a little bit with some of the things. So guess who,
was helping them out? Of course.
It's just like I can't get away from that teaching gig.
Guys.
But I did other things, and I started reading quite a bit. There's a guy, David Steinberg, who was a longtime editor for the Albuquerque Journal Art section, who reviews books. And David and I would get together. He would give me books that he thought I could read. Wow. And do things like that. So I've, I get together with, former colleagues.
That's awesome.
And have lunch at least once a month and stuff, and do those kinds of things. And so, it took me a while to kind of shift gears.
I love it.
But now I sort of have.
And so tell me what else is you fill the people up on what else is up in Mr. O's life right now. You've got some beautiful grandkids.
Yeah, I like to see them. I'm going to see, my granddaughters this weekend.
Awesome.
And, I have my son Lenny,
of course,
who's doing a training program to learn how to develop work skills, and helping him with that.
How old is Lenny now?
Lenny's 21.
It's so crazy, man.
I know, isn't that?
I remember when I was in high school, he was in his
we adopted Lenny when he was 2, and of course he was born with, special needs, but he's doing real well. We're trying to, like I said, he's in a program to help him learn how to do, develop work skills and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so, that keeps me pretty busy. And my oldest daughter had twins 2 years ago. And they had 2 little rat terriers.
Wow.
And they couldn't take care of them. So now we have 3 dogs. That's a job in itself. So, I keep busy, and I love running into people and talking to them. I had a student who I met for coffee last week, who I hadn't seen in 15 years. She was living in L.A. Wow. She came back to visit somebody here, and she's been doing making CDs, doing singing, songwriting, and other stuff. And it was so wonderful just to get a chance to sit down and talk to her. And so things like that are just wonderful to do.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what, if I had to ask you, Mr. O, what was something that, of all the years of teaching, if you could instill in someone that wanted to be a guitar teacher in the future, like what are some words of wisdom that you would pass along if you had to summarize Cliff Notes for being a...
Well, as far as, the teaching itself, you need to make sure that the students feel successful. And the other thing is that you care about the fact that they're successful.
Absolutely.
That's one of the first things you learn is a student has to know that you're interested in them as a person, interested in them succeeding, that sort of thing, that you really care about them as a person. Because if they get that sense from you that you're really invested in them, then the rest is just a matter of figuring out how to help them do the best they can and get the right kind of guidance for developing their skills and knowledge. But if they feel like, because I remember when I was younger taking a couple lessons from people, and you could tell that they were just filling in time for the half an hour or hour.
Yeah.
If a student gets that feeling, they're not going to want to work with you. They're not going to want, you have to get across to them that, it's about the instrument you're learning, but it's really about seeing you as a person succeed, enjoy this, do good. And so that's my word of wisdom. That's got to come along with anything else is that connection between you and the student.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I look forward to the next one because we're going to do more down the road. You were joking and saying that we ain't got nothing to talk about. But we just touched the iceberg of what we could get into,
Well, you know what? Like I said, I will podcast for food. So
the next time we'll do some pizza and we'll do it at nighttime is what we'll do. Or some donuts and we'll do it early,
Yeah. Well, listen, one of the great things is that looking back on my time, thinking about people like you and John and other folks, I'm proud of what I did. And I feel like, if I see my students paying it forward in terms of, doing music in the community or teaching or whatever it is that they do, that really makes me feel good. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you from generations and generations of guitar players that love the instrument so much more thanks to you and your love for teaching. So
thank you,
Claudio. Thank you, Mr. O. And until the next time, my man, okay?
Okay.
That was the show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're going to get to listen to a little bit of Mr. O's album titled Songs for Eden. It's got this beautiful photo on the front of the album of him and his granddaughter as he's playing a banjo. And I know you're going to enjoy it. I'm going to put some links so you yourself can go check it out and enjoy it. But for right now, we're going to get to listen to one of the tracks titled 12 Gates to the City. Here's Mr. O.
What a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Who are those children all dressed in red? There's 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Must be the children that Moses led. There's 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. When I get to heaven, gonna sing and shout. There's 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Ain't nobody there gonna turn me out. There's 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah.